Okay, let's catch everybody up on where we're at. I just wanted to show you this. We've already pulled the pump, the water pump. I'll show you that. Taking off the gear that goes to the exhaust valve, and we're now taking off, or we loosened the drive gear here. Notice I have vice grips not too tight on the rod. I also have a extension that fits very close to the bearings, and I attached a clutch holder, Rocky Mountain. I'll be doing a website probably that sells a lot of these tools too for a little bit less. But then I hit it with a impact hammer. Okay, brings that bolt right off. Now they do make, you can actually buy Suzuki tools to do this one at a time. The problem is though, a lot of the engines are different tools, so if you have to have a special tool, go for it. If you don't, don't. Just be careful. And I made sure I wouldn't break or damage anything. Here's the water pump, comes through from the other side in the very front. Notice it has a circlip that holds it on a washer. There's a seal right here that we'll replace. Inspected the bearing. The bearings seem good. By rolling it, feeling if there's any anomalies, using a loop to get in close with the light, inspected the gear. Next to it is your this is the exhaust valve assembly. Okay. In addition to that, I marked it where it lined up when I took it off. Lots of pictures as you go. I mean, of course, everything by the book, see that? But at the same time, the book sometimes will show you an exploded view, and it's confusing to tell maybe which side a washer goes on or a spacer or something. Another aspect is you need to be extremely careful as you take the transmission apart, that you keep every item in its proper order. Okay? We'll inspect it all for cracks and wear. So each assembly coming off this side, this screwdriver, which I'll end up tie wrapping, is holding this gear system together. This screwdriver will take every piece of this as we disassemble it, and then I'll tie wrap them all together in the order they came out in. I don't know if you can see this, but notice these specks of metal right down in here. So that's part of the kick-starting shaft. We're going to be really careful as we inspect this whole area, and we'll clean the case extremely well before we put it back together with the new bearings. When the case is sitting on its side facing me right and left, okay? So we have all of the gears, washers, clips. We'll end up tie wrapping this together, and then we'll tie wrap this together. Now on the left side, have a bad gear, okay? And that could have been part of our problem, case crack problem. You see there's a tooth missing there. So each one of these will get inspected very closely, and we'll mic them according to the manual. But if you look in the case, you see all the metal shavings, and I actually found a chunk of aluminum. The drive shaft comes out here. The bearing was bad, so we'll finish. We're gonna tap this out, and we'll take some photographs and mark this, pull it out. Then we'll tap the bearings out. We may heat the outside case a little bit. When we go to put them in, we'll put the bearings in the freezer for 20 minutes, and then we'll heat the outside case. We're going to pull the crank, finish micing it, and replace all the bearings and seals, get a new gear, put her back together, and have some fun. No, there were shavings. We blew most of them out, and as we pull everything out, we'll make sure it's clean. Once you get down this far, we've got the crank rebuilt. They did not sell an aftermarket crank for it. They did sell a rod, Rocky Mountain ATV. You can buy parts for less through me. But had a professional put the new rod in, looking good, reassembling the whole system. And this is the crack case that we bought from eBay online. And this bearing here is typically very easy to get out. A little bit of heat and cooling in the right spots, you tip it over, give it a little tap with the mount, bearing falls out. Well, not this one, it's frozen. Okay? So what should be a 2-minute job turns into mini. We're cutting it out to de-stress it, to then pop it out with a Dremel, with a diamond bit. Cut the bearing, we took the insides out, then we cut a little slice along here, and a chisel without affecting the case because we've weakened it. But we haven't cut clear through, a sharp chisel. Just use the grinder. We've been able to bring this up. And now notice, even with that, relieving that much pressure on this bearing, she still ain't coming out. This is the easy bearing. We've got a piece of the bearing up. We've clipped onto it. Unbelievable. I've never seen one of these. This is shift rail bearings that just didn't come out. Now we're going to heat the exterior one more time and see if we can pop her out with the vice grips. So I've never had to take a bearing out like this. Ever. Right? Anyway. Rotary diamond cutting disc. Dremel. And work it a piece at a time. Don't hit the aluminum. The aluminum looks great. Case looks great. And we finally got her out. Take your finger, run it around. Eyeball it. Looks straight. Looks smooth. No sharp edges. Good to go. Get the rest of the old bearings out. And put the new bearings in. Press them in. Put the seals in with the seal kit. And we'll do the other side. Okay, so the case we bought to replace the cracked case. The final bearing was in here, which, as you can see, you cannot use a hot heat cooling system and punch it out from the back side like you can the other bearings. So that's when a great bearing pulling system comes into play. You pull the bearings out of the freezer that are cooled. You grab the correct size, okay? Set the bearing on. After you've heated this up, tap it straight in, okay? Straight in. And by doing that, if you're using excessive force, you're doing it wrong. What we love, all balls. Made in Japan, okay? We're going to take and eyeball the new bearing to make sure it looks like it's the same bearing. If there's any question, get your micrometer out. Okay? Same bearing. We're going to go ahead and install it. It's been cooled off. Going to heat this, put it in. Alright, case has been heated, and guess what? It's going to be hot. Bearing has been cooled in a freezer. And we have a Tuss bearing installer sitting in there straight, and we hope, brass hammer, that it goes in. Now don't crack the case, folks. Before we install this bearing, wood block underneath, so we're not pounding down on the case with the risk of splitting it. Old bearing, which is jacked, new bearing. Notice there's a difference in the lip, so we're going to mic them, okay? And we're going to check the part numbers on the box against the correct part number, just to make sure that it is the correct bearing going in the correct spot. Always visually inspect both sides to make sure they're flush. And if you have any questions, look at the other case to see how those bearings are installed. Okay, gonna put the last two bearings in, the seals in, and then we'll start on the other side. Finally got all the parts, putting it back together. There's 5 engine models, 5 actual models of the bike that year, for fork parts and all kinds of stuff. So we had a blown second gear. That would be right here. And we had a blown third gear, which is in the box. We got the crankshaft in the freezer. They did not sell an aftermarket or a new crank for this bike, but they did sell, Rocky Mountain ATV sold a Pro X rod, of which we had the shop press the rod in the crank. Then we'll heat the bearing and we'll put it in next, the new bearing. Put the counter shaft and the center bearing out. Gonna double check that we have the right ones, put them back in, clean it up, heat and cold. Check them first, then throw them in the freezer for a minute. Loop glasses, make sure you check them, that they're seated correctly. Okay? Always use a shim underneath so you don't break the case. You got one bearing and seal left. Pull the bearing with the bearing puller. Yeah, I love Tuss tools. Use seal puller, pull it out. New seal, new bearing. Alright, after put the seal in, using the exact size socket that slides down in. Okay. It already started to cool from the bearing. But then we take a loop and a flashlight and you make sure it's seated and you measure it back together, and we have them held in place with some tie wraps. Gone through, double checked, always according to the manual, the order, the clips, the washers. Okay. Crank, all new bearings is inserted. You're going to oil this. Everything's been mic'd and checked. Okay. And next thing we'll do is we'll put all the gears in one side, then we'll put the gasket seal on, and we'll put the two pieces together. Next, we'll slide them into their slots. Pictures, remember. Sometimes the book just says put the shift forks back in. Hey, if you ordered parts and they were on back order, it took a month and a half, you may be wondering which fork goes where. So we'll slide the shift forks in, and then the actual little tubes that hold them after oiling them. And the next thing will be to put the gasket on using gasket cement, press it together, we'll heat it to put the crankshaft in, and off we go. What's interesting is the manual on this tranny wasn't any fun at all. Using some Yama lube on the case gaskets. The manual was not very concise. So if the gears aren't blown, you keep them all in order when you pull it, the shafts. But since it had 2 blown gears in it, we had to disassemble the shafts. And you still, obviously the attempt is to keep everything in order, so it'll go back on. Alright, so we're going to take some bolts. See if we can close it. If you start to crank it and the bolts get too tight, don't strip them out. They're 8 mils. Just got to pull it apart and look to see why it's not closing. We set her down, heated her and froze her. Putting all the bolts in a cross pattern. She's going down nicely. Check it to make sure it turns. Oh yeah. Feels good. And we'll torque it all down. probably put a little blue thread lock, pull each one at a time, and torque it down. Got your gasket extra here. Installed the basket according to the manual spec, and the driven gear, clutch driven gear. Torque the nut down, clean the threads on both, and use channel lock pliers to set the locking washer in. Now we're going to install the clutch plates. Have the manual out always step by step, and each plate has been inspected already. So just going to wipe them down, oil them. They came pre-oiled. If they were new, you'd put them in a baggie, separate them all, oil them for about 40 minutes, as long as it takes you to soak in transmission oil. So the plates were already oiled because they were still good. It was a new clutch. But we're going around after we inspect them, make sure they're clean, and put some more oil on them. Okay, this rod's been inspected, straight, clean. And put a little shot of oil down in there. Shot on it. Rod goes in. Okay. The tip with the washer on it is next. And the roller bearing, which is new, and stuck to that with oil. It's loving its spot there. Alright. So the roller bearing really wants to stay right here. There we go. The roller bearing is a new bearing. Bearing side goes down. Okay. A little shot of oil on it. And then, gonna do a quick clean, put it on, tighten them equally, put the springs in. Okay, springs have all been mic'd and checked, tighten them equally, and then tighten them to torque specs after cleaning it. And on the other side, we'll turn the shaft so that it clicks into the slot of the clutch push rod. I'm going to lock her down one more time, torque these down correctly, and put a new O-ring in it, put the bolts in. Already went through all the gears, put the shift lever on, went through gears 1 through 5 in neutral and back down. Worked nicely. The engine is nice and tight like a fresh engine. Hoorah! The manual will show you the torque on all the bolts, and bolts that aren't listed, for example in the clutch section, tightening down the pressure plate. It's a 5mm bolt with a 7 on the top, okay, which means 3.5 foot-pounds, which is 42 inch-pounds. There's a conversion chart online. So we'll get that tightened down and move forward. There's a little bit of Yama Bond adhesive, just very small in strategic places, and it has notches where it's supposed to hold the O-ring in, but it wasn't. So in the manual you'll have all kinds of things. It'll just say, hey, reassemble this, okay, which we're going to do. But it doesn't tell you the spline location, and there's not like a pin marking on it, according to the manual. So remember, we took a great photographic record, and the photographic record shows the exact location, so we don't have to guess at it. We can install it, and it'll be in the right slot first time. I do mark them with markers, but inevitably when you're cleaning them, most of the marking comes off. Ended up buying a second book instead of a digital that claimed it was for this year, because the fact was it wasn't. That's a warning, man. Make sure you get a 99 Suzuki book that's if you have an X model for the X model. I think it's TUVWX. This is 5 different models. The impeller goes in on the inside. We put the cases back together. Okay, on the case. Has 2 bearings in it. We've replaced the bearings in all this. It'll have a fresh bottom end. Very tight. Oh my gosh, feels good. Crankshaft, new rod bearings. But we froze in the freezer this drive gear for the pump, and we're going to keep them cool and cool the shaft down on the impeller gear, so that when we go to install it, that it's a little bit smaller and it fits right in without using only light pressure. We're only Yama bonding one side. The case side was clean and straight without any problems. It's got a little bit of variation in it on the edges, so we're gonna make sure it seals good. We've lined our gasket up. We have Yama bond on one side. We have the 2 bearings that we want to line up. We have the exhaust valve shaft connected correctly. And we're hoping, we want to put a little bit of grease on this seal. Actually, we'll probably do it on the shaft down a little lower, because you don't want it to collect dirt, but you do want it to slide on there fairly smoothly. Line everything up, look at the height, and we're going to tap it a little bit with the hammer. Screwdriver was holding the rod, so if I wanted to torque a bolt, it would torque easily. There we go. Oh my gosh, isn't that beautiful? Now, grab a flashlight and let's see if the gasket lined up. Yeah, it did. Reassembled piston pan according to the manual. New circlips are supposed to be put in when you do that. Everything's tight. Facing forward, the rings have to fit in the notch. There's notches on the piston. You oil everything. Got the exhaust valve in. We install the cylinder head. First, we'll make sure this is extremely clean. You check your O-rings that they stayed seated. Alright. We'll slide this gently on. Do one more little flashlight look to make sure the O-rings are good. And then we'll torque it according to manual specs. All cylinder heads have a correct order to be tightened in. Okay, shows you in the manual. This particular one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 18 foot-pounds. One thing I love about this wheel vise that I took off of my Harbor Freight lift is it works great for holding items on your workbench. So, go back to torquing. The cylinder head, 18 foot-pounds, in the pattern they prescribed. Put the countershaft sprocket on, and then we'll put the engine back in the bike. We'll check the carburetor to make sure the jets are clean in it, and put a new spark plug in. The reason we didn't do the magneto up here was because I left it all wired, and we'll reconnect it, line it up with the slots as the manual calls for. It's pretty straightforward, and give her a kick over. To sum it up, everything's wire tied off. Gonna unwire tie it, mount the engine back in the same way we took it out in reverse, and fire this puppy up.